Any movement outward is a success.
Hmm.
Any movement outward,
And why
whether it
is
be
that?
because that's what the Holy Spirit rewards.
Well, welcome back to the Living Sent podcast. My name is Justin Wester. I'm your host, and if you are brand new to this podcast, I want to welcome you to the Living Sent community. Let me quickly explain why this podcast exists. It exists to help you live like an everyday missionary in your household, your neighborhood, your workplace, and your city. And I firmly believe that if you call yourself a Christ follower, then Jesus has already sent you out into the world to show and share the good news of the kingdom with those around you. And my prayer is that each of these episodes would challenge you to do just that. Well, I'm incredibly excited to get to today's episode because we have Sam Rainer joining us to talk about his book that he released in September of 2023, and it's called The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church. And maybe you've noticed this in your context as well, but there seems to be a very real shift occurring around us, and it's a shift away from this disjointed and detached expression of faith, and it's toward one that is more integrated and local in expression. Sam brings a ton of clarity to what's happening culturally around us and how Christ followers can leverage that within the neighborhood for God's kingdom work. So whether you are a pastor or a missional community leader, or maybe you're just someone who's simply looking to start a Bible study in your home neighborhood or connect with your neighbors, this episode is really going to encourage you. I want to remind you as we get into this to get the show notes from today's episode. You need them. And here's why. Not only will you get a complete transcript from the episode, you're going to get additional tools and questions to go deeper into today's topic. So my hope is that you don't just listen to this episode, but that you actually put it into practice. So the show notes are going to help you do just that. To get them, go to justinwester.com. Navigate to the podcast page and click on the section that says download the show notes at the bottom, and boom, they are yours for free. So without further ado, here's my interview with Sam Rainer. Awesome. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining us on the Living Sent podcast. Sam, you serve as the president of Church Answers, and you are also the co-founder of Rainer Publishing. I'm reading off here. You also are the lead pastor at West Bradenton Baptist Church in Bradenton, Florida, local Floridian, which I love. And you also write, teach, speak, and consult on a variety of church health issues. And then in addition to all of that, you co-host some podcasts yourself, Rainer on Leadership and EST.Church. And then you are also married with 4 kiddos, and you foster as well. So you are doing a ton. You must have a full schedule. And for listeners who maybe are unaware of who you are and maybe unaware of Church Answers, I'd love to just begin there. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what Church Answers is and why it exists and what you do there.
Thank you for the kind words. Church Answers is a resource provider to churches, digital products that help churches do outreach. We have coaching and consulting that we do as well. And we put out a lot of free content. So I think most people know us through our articles and podcasts and things like that because we publish daily with everything that we do. But at our heart, we want to help churches get healthier. We have this tagline, got church questions, we got church answers. And one of my favorite parts of Church Answers is actually just getting to know pastors such as yourself and helping churches do the Great Commission better.
Awesome. And like I mentioned in the introduction, you released The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church. And correct me if I'm wrong here. And is it September of 2023? Was that the release month?
I have no idea.
I think
I've written like 6 books in 5 years. I cannot keep them all straight.
They're all blurred.
That sounds about right. You asked me when the release date of my book is. It was last year at the time of this recording. So yeah, we'll just go with the date that you said.
Awesome.
That sounds good.
Well, I'm always curious about kind of the backstory to some of these books. Like, could you explain just a little bit, like, where did this book come from? Did it emerge from some of the research that you guys do there at Church Answers, or Did it come just from your heart of pastoring, maybe a little bit of both?
Yeah, so the real root of the book was there was a Sunday here at West Bradenton where there was this elderly couple that got frustrated that they couldn't find a parking spot. We have a parking problem here. We're buried in a neighborhood. We have 4.5 acres. That's it. And we're this decent sized church on 4.5 acres. We've got way more people than we should on these acres. Let me just say that. We're in the city. And so this elderly couple got frustrated that they couldn't find a spot. So we have the classic 4 columns and stairs out front. And they just pulled right up on those stairs, parked, went into the church. And that's when it hit me. It was like, we're not going to be a regional church. We're not going to be, unless something weird happens, we're not going to be a mega church. Now, we're growing and we're getting larger, but we're not, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 on this campus. We literally cannot hold that many people. So it just hit me. And I'm like, well, what kind of church are we? What are we aiming for? We're not going to be a regional church. We're buried in a neighborhood. We don't have the parking lot to be a mega church. So I guess we're just a neighborhood church. And that's where the whole idea came from. I started researching it. Obviously, we started asking more questions and doing studies around it. And then the book formed out of a lot of that research. But the heart of the question was this sweet elderly couple who both have since passed on, parking on our front steps, and me just going, why did they do that? Well, they did it because they couldn't find a parking spot. They got frustrated. They want to go to church. That's just it.
I love it. I love it. So it's called The Surprising Return of the Neighborhood Church. And when I read the title, to me, that begs a couple questions. So first, the very first question that comes to mind is, what exactly do you mean by that? Like, how would you define neighborhood church? Like, and how would a listener know if they've seen one, driven past one, or if they're even a part of one right now?
It's a loose definition. In the book, I go into a lot more detail, but a neighborhood church is a church that is established in the boundaries of a neighborhood where people understand that it's a neighborhood. Like, you talk to the locals and they, say, oh, you live in Palmasola neighborhood. And it's like, no, I'm one over, so that's the neighborhood I live in. You kind of, the lines are blurry as to exactly where one neighborhood ends and begins, but everyone kind of just knows where they are. So that would be in a more urban setting. You think of communities that are like Miami or Chicago, New York. Those are extreme examples, but you don't have to be a big city. It can be a medium-sized city as well. I think of Louisville, Kentucky. Louisville's got all of these neighborhoods. You've got the Highlands and you've got St. Matthews. And if you're driving through it, they all kind of look the same. But the locals know, no, that's the Highlands, no, that's St. Matthews. And a neighborhood church would be a church that is established within those boundaries, recognized as a church within those boundaries, and one that has some sort of history with the neighborhood. Can you plant a neighborhood church? Yeah, you can. You can go into it with that strategy. What differentiates a neighborhood church from, say, like a regional church is a neighborhood church says, we're really just going to reach the people right around us. A regional church says, we want you to drive 30 minutes here. And those are completely different paradigms. So a neighborhood church is going to minister to the local high school, like one local high school. There may be a few more elementary schools in a neighborhood, but we're really just micro-focused on our neighborhood. And that can be a large neighborhood. It can be a small neighborhood. Neighborhood churches come in all shapes and sizes. But in essence, it's a church within the boundaries of a neighborhood that is focused on reaching the neighborhood. And that could be a church that's 100 years old or 1 year old.
Yeah. So it says the surprising return. And I love that because it kind of prompts another question. If it's returning, that means that it's gone somewhere. So I guess my second question is, where did the neighborhood church go? And maybe you could speak to, I know you do in the book here, almost to like an evolution of the neighborhood church. Has it gone through some phases, and where do you see it now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the neighborhood church is not in a healthy place right now, generally. And the book is more about what could be than what will be. So it's a book that I wrote hoping that more neighborhood churches get healthy. Listen, there was a big building boom in post World War II. So most of your neighborhood churches that we recognize as neighborhood churches today were built during that era. Now, obviously, you can go back to the 1700s and the 1800s, but Boston's got those neighborhoods, right? Oh, we've been around since the 1700s. But for most cities, most metropolitan areas, you're looking at post-World War II boom. And these are neighborhoods that were, on the outer ring of a community, but now maybe 50 years later, kind of in the mid-tier ring. So yeah, they've gone through several phases. And even, by the way, even new suburbs can have neighborhood churches. It's just because, your church wasn't, started 50 years ago. I mean, you can see these neighborhood churches intentionally placed even in newer communities. But generally speaking, we're talking about a post-World War II boom. And they did well. You talk about the heyday. The heyday is usually in the 1970s, 1980s, when baby boomers were getting married and having kids, and grandparents were still there, and you hear people long for that era, right? If you've pastored in an established church, particularly in a neighborhood established church, you know that. Well, what was going on? Well, they were started at the time. You're talking 1970s. They may have been started 20 or 25 years earlier, and that's when they were peaking. Then you get into the 90s and the 2000s, and they declined. Almost all of these neighborhood churches declined, and many of them have an elderly congregation remaining. But the facility is still there. The campus is still there. The desire for a lot of them is still there to grow and to reach the community. They're just not in a very healthy place to do so. So the book is about like, hey, there's a huge opportunity with this real estate. There's a huge opportunity. You hear about, a church on every street corner. A lot of communities say, there's a church on every street corner. And there's like a bit of negativity associated with it. And I'm like, why is that negative? What? These are kingdom outposts. There's like 10 churches in that town. Like, great. That means 10 opportunities to do kingdom work. I don't understand. And I get what people are saying. What they're saying is that there's a lot of churches they're not doing anything. Fair enough. But let's not malign the fact that they're there. That's a good thing. Let's put them to work. So that's what I mean by this surprising return. Couple that with the decline of the megachurch movement, and I think that's the opportunity. And I talk a lot about that in the book as well, where megachurches have seen their day. There will always be megachurches. There's gonna be healthy megachurches, megachurches that do great, and I'm glad they're there. But the number of megachurches in the United States peaked in 2012, right around that time frame, and there's probably half as many now as there were in 2012. So the movement is waning. The megachurch movement was a baby boomer movement. A lot of these baby boomers left their neighborhood churches. They went to regional churches, which became megachurches. And that whole era is phasing out with the baby boomers. So the return part of this is millennials, Gen Z, and others. A lot of work from home now. People saying, hey, I don't really want to drive 45 minutes to church just because it's a bigger church. I would rather just find one that's a little more local, a little more connected. There's a boutique movement among younger generations, a desire to kind of support local. These are all movements that are connected to the neighborhood movement. And you add in more work from home, not less, if you're talking 20 years ago. And I think it's a big opportunity. So the waning of the megachurch movement, the growing boutique movement, the growing work from home movement, and yeah, these neighborhood churches, if they will do what they're supposed to do, people aren't just going to show up just because, but if they will do what they're supposed to, they could really capitalize on it.
So we've all driven past those church buildings on the side of the road, and these neighborhood churches, some of them probably older, and wondered, man, are these things still open? Like, do people actually gather here? Like, are they involved in the community? What's going on? So what might a healthy neighborhood church look like in a community? If you could paint like the ideal picture, the utopia, what might that look like?
West Bradenton Baptist Church. Bradenton.
I knew you were going to say that.
That's my utopia. No, we do not have it all figured out, and we still have a lot to learn and a lot to do to grow. So ideally, a neighborhood church is a church that is doing gospel work in its location. Every church has an address, and every church has an address for a reason. God sovereignly placed that church in that address for a reason, and it's to reach the community around it. So ideally, you've got a group of people, whether it be 40, 50, or 60, or in our case, we're 600, 700. We're a big neighborhood church, but reaching outward. So we're throwing block parties. We're sending our people to give gifts to the neighbors. We're trying to invite all the neighbors to church. We're a known presence in the community. We have a positive reputation in the community. The leaders of the church, you're talking like what's an ideal neighborhood church? The leaders of the church are known in the community, even by people who may disagree with them. They're just like, oh yeah, that's Pastor Sam. Yeah, I'm not with him on his views of marriage, but he ministered to my family. So even if people disagree with you, you're still a known factor and still known to be kind and gracious and generous, a ministering presence in the community. And ideally, obviously, these neighborhood churches would be people of conviction, people who live out the word of God, live out the call to holiness, live out this call to love their neighbor, that live out the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. And that's every church, by the way. That's regional churches, mega churches, neighborhood churches, rural churches, church plants. I mean, every church should be doing that. But the neighborhood church is like, a lot of times the name of the neighborhood is in the church. And it's like, if the neighborhood's gonna have a church, it's that one. And unfortunately, a lot of these neighborhoods, it's not. The people that go to church are driving to a different location. They shouldn't have to do that.
Well, on page 6, you wrote this. You said, most importantly, neighborhood churches are culturally woven into the fabric of the local community. A neighborhood church exists not only in the community, but also for the community. And so many of our listeners, we were talking about this before, they're either part of neighborhood churches, or maybe they're leading some type of missional community that's geared toward discovering the heartbeat of their local community. How would a group of Christians start to discover the essence or some of the rhythms of the neighborhood? What would be the things that they're looking for? How would they tap into that?
Yeah, I mean, that's easy. Volunteer for things that aren't at the church. Coach at the ball fields. Serve as the secretary of the homeowners association. Be on the parent-teacher association. Be an active person at your YMCA, or go onto the advisory board of whatever. Join Kiwanis. Whatever's happening in the neighborhood beyond the church, particularly with other nonprofits, be a part of that. So it's Living Sent, by the way, which is, I think, the name of this podcast, right?
That's right. That's right.
If we're going to be about the Missio Dei, I'm assuming you've been influenced by some level of missiology.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If we're going to live out the Missio Dei, the mission of God, if we're going to live sent, it's John 17. If we're going to do all that, then yeah, we shouldn't be just about what's happening in the walls of the church, which is very important, by the way. The programming is extraordinarily important, and I would argue that neighborhood churches that do programming well will benefit. But it's also about just being a presence and an active participator in the neighborhood activities. Coach team, do something that gets you out there. And that's, and I'll give you an example how. We will sponsor any team. Our church has a budget to sponsor any sports team where a member is a coach. And we will invest in that sports team. You're going to have the best uniforms. We're going to pour ourselves into that team because one of our church members is a coach. And basically, like, you tell us what you need. Oh, you want the sign on the outfield, like you want center field. Like, we're gonna buy that because we just want to be we want to be that helpful presence in the community, and that coach is going to be a positive influence in the community. So yeah, you're very much interwoven into the fabric of the community. If you talk about West Bradenton and people who serve in local government and on in the school systems and hospital administration and like all of that happens here in Bradenton, like, our people are a part of it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found really helpful is what you mentioned in chapter 3, and I think it related to the way that churches think about their relationship to their community. You said this. You said, "Remember, the neighborhood does not exist to help the church grow. The church exists to help the neighborhood grow." And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that just a little bit more, and why is that such an important mindset to have? What would happen if churches really started to own in on that and view
Yeah.
their neighborhoods that way?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a problem in a lot of churches where, man, I want to grow. I get it. Like, I want my church to grow too. And you are judged by the attendance growth of your church. That's the metric of success, right? So I get it. I feel that pressure myself on those low attendance Sundays where you're like, man, nobody was here. We had like 20 or 30% less than normal. Like, you feel like a failure. I understand. But yeah, if you're going to be a successful neighborhood church, you got to get beyond that. And you got to say, listen, the people of this neighborhood aren't here to come to my church to make me feel better or look better about our attendance. Oh, it's a full room now. No, we exist to like be a benefit to our community. And if we exist to be a benefit to our community, God's going to honor that. God's going to honor, our work in the community. Of course, we're still sharing the gospel. Of course, we invite people to church. Of course, we want to fill the room. But people are not people aren't the target of the church so that you can pull them in so that you can just fill a room. The people of the community are there to, so, they have needs. They have things that, God's working in their life, and you want to help them accomplish what God wants for their life, whether or not they go to your church or not. And, that's something that for our neighborhood, it's kind of like, oh, like I've got a church. I'm a believer. It's like, well, it's okay. Like, we'll still minister to you. Like, oh, well, but I'm not going to go to your church. I'm an elder at my church. It's like, that's fine. We still want to minister to you. We don't want to take you from your church. And that's the posture that I think neighborhood churches should have.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. You talk about some of the neighborhood churches' challenges. You list off a bunch of them in the book, but I wanted to see if you could maybe list off a few that you think are most challenging, most problematic. And if a listener is a member of a neighborhood church and they want to start becoming more engaged in their community, what are some of those challenges that they're going to probably face if this isn't their current posture? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the three big challenges are butts in the seats, facilities, and finance, right?
Okay.
So, let's just boil this down to very practical stuff. And I give a lot more detail in the book, of course, and I try to put some nice language to it to make it a good read. But ultimately, I mean, the median church size, there's some debate now post-COVID about how big the typical church is, but the median church size is somewhere between 40 and 60 right now, depending on who's counting. My dad, when he does his research, he thinks it's more towards the 40 side. I think it's a little more towards the 60 side, but let's just be real. When you hear that number, let's say 50, let's split the difference. Most people think, oh, that's a small church. It's like, no. That's the median, which means half of churches are larger, half of churches are smaller in the United States. I mean, we are a nation of quote unquote smaller churches. So right off the bat, what's a hurdle? What's an issue is, well, maybe if you have 50 people that are like raring to go, I don't know that I used that phrase correctly, but if they are ready to go, then that's awesome. But what if they're all elderly, they're all 80 plus, and it's like they can barely get here on Sunday mornings? Well, you got an uphill battle there. You've got a lot of work to do. So I think one of the realities of the neighborhood church is your typical churchgoer is 60 to 70 years old, and your typical church is like 50 people. And that's a ton of neighborhood churches. So what does that mean? A lot of them have too much facility. There's a lot of deferred maintenance. The roof needs to be replaced. The signage is bad. Nobody's really landscaped the yard in any last 10 years. So why would somebody with kids show up here where they're not? And, and then you add in the financial pressures that a lot of these churches can feel because they don't have a lot of giving units. Well, you just don't have the money. It's a bivocational pastor, like doing what he can. just don't have the money to really do it. So yeah, there are some very real challenges associated with the neighborhood church, which is why adoption, uh, um, fostering churches, the things that we talk about at Church Answers is going to become more and more common. Multi-site churches that kind of absorb some of these campuses. I don't want that for a neighborhood church. I don't want that to be like the first option. Goodness, try to make it work with your church before you just go give your facility to somebody. I think God will honor your effort, but sometimes you can't help that. So you add in the growing multi-site movement and how a lot of these locations are going to be absorbed into some larger churches, and it doesn't mean mega churches. It could be a church of 300 or 400 that ends up absorbing it. That adds a different sort of spin on it as well, because do the people who are now leading this campus really know the neighborhood? They may or may not. So yeah, there's some very, very real challenges for neighborhood churches, but the book is more hopeful. The book is like, hey, God can work. Like we can still see this happen, and that excites me.
Yeah,
That excites me.
absolutely. And so you talk a little bit about that in chapter 7. It's kind of like the comeback process, and at least from what I picked up, one of the top priorities has got to be like a culture shift. So how might a group of individuals at a neighborhood church begin that? How might they start to shift that culture? You mentioned one of the most revealing questions that they could ask is this one here. What gets your church most excited? Why is
Yeah.
that such a good question, and why is that such a good culture shifting question?
Yeah. I actually was speaking yesterday. You don't know this. I was speaking yesterday about an hour and a half north of here, and I posed that question to a group of people and just blank stares.
Yeah.
Like for a lot of them, like what gets your church most excited? It is a non-threatening question. It's a question anybody should answer because it's personal. It's not a right or wrong answer. What gets your church most excited? And the answers are very telling. Like if there's no answer, then it's like there's no excitement. If people are like, we're excited about, potlucks, it's like, okay, that's good, food, but that's very inward. We're excited when people come to Christ. I mean, that's what you would hope to hear. We're excited about Vacation Bible School. Okay, now I've got something to work with. That can be an outwardly focused ministry. It can be something used to get into the neighborhood. We're excited about the local high school sports. Okay, maybe upward, use a program to get people thinking about how to reach their community through something like recreation ministry. So yeah, the answer is very, very revealing. What gets people most excited in your church or about your church. But yeah, I do get a lot of blank stares when I ask because it's an unexpected question, but it's a good one to get the conversation started. And because it's so non-threatening, it can be a good launching pad for actually doing something.
Yeah. I'm just curious if you've ever had somebody share this through your work at Church Answers. Have you ever had somebody say something like the leadership or the staff at our current church is not really interested in this, but there's maybe a small group or a small handful of people that see that this is a really huge need and it can change things for our church. Have you guys ever encountered that? And how have you coached somebody through that? Like, what would you tell a person who says, man, I just feel alone. I don't know what else to do, but our church doesn't seem to be on board for this, but I sense this is the direction we need to go.
Yeah, I mean, we encounter that all the time with people who genuinely want to reach the community and do it in a God-honoring way, and they're at a church that's just happy to do nothing. And so yeah, we've talked to, it's mainly, we don't talk to many church, it's not like church members are calling us to complain about their pastors.
Right.
We don't get that a lot.
Yeah, that's good.
It has happened. That has happened. I've gotten those emails. And usually I'm just like, yeah, just go talk to your pastor. I have zero desire to get involved with this mess. I don't do mediation. I have zero desire to do mediation here. Go talk to your counselor. Or just pray and talk to the Holy Spirit. That's probably better. But yeah, we do have staff people that reach out and they say, we're stuck. I've got a leadership group, an elder board, or a lead pastor that's just, they're just kind of going through the motions. And my counsel there is, well, one, try to make it work, be honest, be upfront, and, if needed, call somebody out and just say, listen, we're not doing what we should be doing. But in a lot of those cases, it ends up with somebody just moving on. I mean, because you don't have the authority to make a decision, to actually lead change. And I would caution anyone who is like, well, I'm just going to blow it up. I'm just going to wreck it all. And like, yeah, don't do that either.
Yeah.
Just because you think that something's not happening the way that you want it to happen, that's really not a good reason to go to the nuclear option. Like, that's just not healthy for anybody, because you're going to be on your way out anyway. So why blow it up? But yeah, that's something that we encounter. There's a lot of stuck churches out there.
Yeah.
There are a ton of stuck churches out there. And for many of them, they can get out of it. They really can. I mean, yeah, you're stuck in the mud, but with use some off-roading examples here, with a winch and some tools, you can get you out of it and on your way. But yeah, it's a process sometimes. Some churches are quite stuck.
For sure. So what have been some ways that your church has been successful at engaging their neighbors? And maybe you could touch on specifically a little bit what you learned through the pandemic. Did the pandemic itself teach you guys anything new about outreach, about mission, about evangelism, that sort of thing?
What we did in the pandemic is rip the Band-Aid off. Like, so it was like, we need a lot of changes, so we're just going to do all of them now.
Yeah.
And maybe that was wise, maybe it wasn't, but for us, it did work. So what did we learn through the pandemic? What I learned through the pandemic is I don't want another pandemic.
That's right.
That's what I learned, because we regathered with significantly less people, less than half, like a third of where we were before, which was hard. It was but we started with a good core. And what we've done as a church is very simple. We take the posture of being the hospitality of the neighborhood. So we're always bringing gifts. We're always doing stuff for kids. We throw a lot of block parties. We are the place to be on Halloween, because our Fall Fest is on Halloween night, no matter what night it is. So we are the place to be. And we give like tangible things to our people to take to their neighbors, like gift bags and things like that. And it's got invite cards in there to some specific things. And so we are just constantly, we do inviting better than we do evangelism, but we're doing evangelism training this year to get our people equipped to go from, hey, inviting someone to church on a regular basis to actually sharing Jesus with them. Those are two different things, but it's both very important. And I would just say, if your church has like zero evangelism, hasn't done it in forever, just start by just teaching them how to invite people to church. Like, oh, we're gonna have a choir day, or the kids are doing something, or hey, we're having a big meal afterwards, you should come. I mean, that's a very non-threatening way to get people thinking outwardly, just by mere invitation. So that's where we started, was with an invite culture. Now we're shifting more into an evangelism culture.
So you guys are in the neighborhood, engaged among the neighbors. What would you say has surprised you most about leading this type of change where you're serving as pastor? And then maybe you could also speak to, what are you seeing across the nation as well, as you work with some of these churches at Church Answers who say, we're taking this thing, we're going to run with it, we're going to be more engaged. Has there been something that stood out that really surprised you about that?
Yeah, I guess one of the more surprising things is there is a neighborhood church movement that's beginning, and it's actually, we work with a lot of individual churches, but we work more with denominations.
Okay.
So we have denominations calling us, like denominational leaders. Like, I lead the whole revitalization wing of my denomination, and we're going to put this into practice, and we want to teach 500 churches how to do this. So that's been the surprise. Is I wrote the book for like pastors of neighborhood churches, not thinking that denominational leaders would read it and go, my goodness, we should put some of these principles into practice.
Yeah.
So we're actually able to scale a lot of what we're doing. That God's blessed with that. So that's been fun. But in terms of like just success and what we see across the nation, any movement outward is a success. Any movement outward.
And why
Whether it
is
be-
that?
Because that's what the Holy Spirit rewards. I mean, I've never invited somebody to church. This week I invited 10 people to church. The Holy Spirit is going to honor that. Prayer, like, God, give me opportunities to share my faith. You're going to get them. Like, any intentional movement outward, any intentional effort to live sent, God honors. So yeah, it's a spiritual thing. The battle is not against flesh and blood. Like, this is a spiritual battle. And when your church actually starts doing what the Bible says to do, guess what? God works.
Yeah. So what would be maybe some parting words or words of encouragement to a pastor who's listening, or even another leader that's listening right now? How would you encourage them?
Yeah, I would say just don't give up. There's a lot of burnout out there. There's a lot of hurt. I've been burned by a couple of churches. I've had some hard cases. Sometimes you got to leave. Just no other option. It's like what's best for your family. I get it, but don't give up. There is such an undersupply of pastors right now and church leaders that, like, I mean, there's just every church needs something. It seems like, and it seems like almost 1 out of 3 churches has an opening. I know in our case, in my tribe, Southern Baptist tribe, that's the case. Like, it's just almost like in certain locations, like literally 1 out of 3. So there's such a need out there that we can't have any more church leaders or pastors dropping out. Like, we really need people to help with what needs to be done in our nation. But I also know that it's hard. And it can be challenging to lead a stuck church, because they're stuck. But the opportunities are also incredible. And I firmly believe that if we just do basic stuff as churches and as believers, we're going to see a lot of fruit because of it. But we're not doing the basics right now. So just you don't have to be fancy. You don't have to be modern. You don't have to be, up with the times. Just move outward, and I think God will honor it.
So if somebody wanted to dive deeper into the stuff that we've talked about on this episode, where would they go? What resources are available? How would they connect or get in contact with you?
Yeah, churchanswers.com is a great place to go. It's where our content is. It's where our resources are located. You can find a variety of things there, all sorts of resources to help you do outreach. We've got certifications. We've got Church Answers University. We've got a bookstore there. I mean, everything's at churchanswers.com. So that would be the best place to reach out and see what's going on.
Awesome. Sam, thank you so much, man. This has been an encouragement to me personally, but I know for the listeners as well.
Thank you.
Well, there was a lot there, and if you'd like to learn more about Sam, his work at Church Answers, or how your church or missional community can begin living sent in greater measure within the neighborhood, go ahead and pick up the show notes at justinwester.com. You'll get all of the tools and resources you'll need to take your next step. In the meantime, if you found this episode valuable, I'd appreciate it if you give it a review and share it with a friend. That would mean the world to me. Well, that is all for this month. Remember, you don't have to live sent, you get to. We'll see you next time.